Welcome to GIS 311 Lab X. This is part 4. There are 4 parts, 4 major parts to Lab X. There were 3 major parts, but I divided up the part 3 to make parts 3 and 4. This is part 4 of 4. You will be, and we will be, downloading and properly extracting data, utilizing the raw data LX folder, the data LX folder, adding layers to our map, and zipping up our user ID LabX directory for submission, and finalizing our write-up for submission, because there are 2 deliverables for every lab. For most labs, I provide some data in a zip folder, which is technically a file, for the lab via Canvas. Canvas is our learning management system at the University of Washington. You must download and extract the zipped file, which is a compressed folder, to use it. I have provided the data for you to use in LabX. Your task is to properly download and extract the data, and you will do so using the specific instructions provided. This will prepare you for future labs in GIS 311, 312, and 414. Some labs you'll collect your own data, although many labs I will be providing some of the data. To refresh, a zip file is like the sweaters bags that get advertised around Christmas time or the holidays, where you put all your bags in a sweater, use a vacuum, and suck all the air out. A compressed file is very similar. You could not wear the sweater while it was in the compressed file. Similarly, Arc cannot use the data that is within a compressed folder. To complicate things a little bit further, Microsoft Windows applications, for example Microsoft Word, can utilize the data that has all of the air sucked out of it, like the sweater bags. But in GIS there is no way to use the data unless it is extracted, and that is, we unzip it or extract it. This explanation in LabX will be provided here, and then it is expected that students either remember how to do this step or refer back to the lab directions or this video to complete the tasks on their own for all future labs. It is important to not just click through these steps without thinking. You must remember the steps, and I highly suggest you take notes. The great news is nearly 99% of this class is open book. You may use these directions in future labs when necessary. The first step to collecting our data is to open up Mozilla Firefox. And I have Mozilla Firefox open, and I have it open to our course. From there we move to the modules. It's the easiest way to navigate our course. And in this case you're looking at day 2. At the time of this video, day 2 is not available to students yet. It's not published, so you will not see this. In all labs, there's usually a write-up of some sort or a write-up quiz and a zip that is due. This quarter, spring 2020, these will be due after class on April 7th. Always, when being presented with a lab, the first item, no matter what it is, will include the data and the directions. So in this case, I'm going to click on LabX Write-Up, which will have the directions and the data. And we talk about I talk a little bit about the lab, but most of the directions are within the directions portion. Please notice that I am in Mozilla Firefox, because Mozilla Firefox has been found to work the best for downloading data, and 99% of what we do in GIS 311, 312, and 414. When starting this lab, you will have had to have already navigated to LabX Write-Up and open up the directions so that you can see what is supposed to happen. In this case, you may not have saved the directions yet, but I suggest you do now. Click on the directions, if you haven't done so already, and save them to your user ID labx that you've already developed. In this case, I will be using Adobe. I click Save, and it happens to open up to my helpful files. I'm going to go up a directory to see my Spring GIS directory. I'm going to open my labs, my labx, and I have a couple choices of where to save. I could save it in labx. I could put it in my user ID labx. In this case, it really does not matter. So I think I'll just open this up and it'll be inside my user ID labx for now. You could put it elsewhere. And I'll save the file. That file has now been saved and I can move on. Now to get the data. Click on the GIS 311 labx data. A very similar process will ensue. In this case, we're saving a zip file. This is the sweaters that have the air sucked out of them. I'm going to save the file, not open. We never, ever, ever open a zip file in this manner. I'm going to save the file. It goes back to the last area that I was. It's showing that there's nothing in this folder. We know that there is in helpful files of my directory, but there are no zip files, so no other zip files are showing. It should be noted here, if you didn't get this pop-up to enter the name of the file you'd like to save or to ask you where to save the files, it likely ended up in your downloads. So let me cancel this and just give you a heads up. This is your downloads folder, and if you have not set Firefox, as we did at the beginning of this lab, to ask you where to save files, your file is already ended up in the downloads folder. So you should go up to Tools, Options, always ask you where to save files, close, and then come back and try to download the labx data. In this case, I'm going to click on labx data again, click to save the file. I do not want to check this box, by the way. Save the file and navigate to my labx raw data. So I went to my directory, my labs, my labx, and I want to store this within raw data lx. To store it in that folder needs to be in this address bar. From here, I will simply save the data. It is downloaded rather quickly. It is now time to extract the data. I'm going to open up File Explorer and navigate to what just happened to pop up, which was my GIS 311 helpful files, but I'll go up a directory, or I can just click in the directory, labs, labx, and enter my raw data lx. This is the zip file, and this is the data. You can see that Windows knows that it's there, but it cannot be used by Arc. We do not double click the zip file. I should not double click it and then open. We never do this. So close out of that. It may appear that you can get to the data, but I assure you it will not work in GIS. Let me show you one more thing. If I were to open up Labs, LabX, open up the raw data, I can, as you can see, open up the zip file before it's even extracted. So in a sense, I'm looking at these sweaters, but they're still jam-packed in the bag. And I'm in the folder. Here is the data. There's multiple items of data. And I could click on these and move these if necessary within Windows, but ArcMap, Arc Catalog will not recognize these files. It will not see them. So be very cautious to never try to deal with data that is zipped. You always must unzip it or extract it. I'm going to go back to my raw data, so my raw data is showing here. You need to follow these explicit steps to make sure that you get the data in the right spot, and perform these steps in all future labs. There are multiple ways to do this, but this is the way that seems to cause the least trouble for students. If you devise your own method, as long as you end up with the same results, that's great. But if you'd like to get the exact results every time, simply follow this method. I'm going to right click, open with Windows Explorer. So again, on the zip file, something you'll do in every single lab. Right click, open with Windows Explorer. And this is an interesting box. So I'm going to pause a moment and investigate. Again, this is the step. Right click, open with Windows Explorer. This box pop up, it's a security warning. We can say yes. We can check or uncheck this. I would uncheck it, but for now I'm going to leave it checked. Open. And what has happened is this window now has this pink area. It says extract, and this extract all button is available. So again, I'm within now the data labx data zip. It's showing the folder, but it is not extracted yet. I still have to extract. If this did not pop up, I could click on Compress Folder Tools or on the Extract button. Sometimes different software versions of Windows does not work exactly the same. So in this case, you may have to click on one of these two items. But eventually, we're going to click on this Extract All button. I'm going to click Extract All, and I'm presented with another window. And this is a case where Windows lies. Windows states explicitly in this dialog that the data will be extracted to GIS 311 LabX data within the raw data LX within LabX. However, it will not. It will be extracted into GIS 311 LabX data within another folder called GIS 311 LabX data. So there'll be two folders. So to eliminate the double folder issue, we're going to highlight the last folder on the right, click backspace or delete, click in this white area, and then extract. A new window pops up. What I highly suggest is with the new window pops up, immediately close the window that has the pink extract in it. Now it's less confusing. And now within my raw data LX, I have the data that is zipped in the sweaters that have the air sucked out of them, and I also have the data. And if I double click on the data, I can see all the data. On the left hand side of the screen, I can do this the other way and navigate to the data, LabX, raw data, and notice now that there is a folder and the data. So technically the data is in there twice. It's here unzipped and it's here zipped because this folder is indented from the zip file. And these are very important distinctions that you'll come to recognize very easily in working with GIS data. With the data extracted, I can now close Windows or just minimize this window. And I'm going to head over to ArcMap to see what the data looks like in the folder. Here we are in ArcMap. Notice there is no plus, so it looks as though there's nothing in raw data, but you should remember how to look for the data. Notice I refreshed. I right-clicked and refreshed. I clicked the plus to make it a minus. I click this plus to make it a minus, and there are 4 pieces of data. If I go up to this raw data, we can find the same exact data. And notice now it can be seen. Remember that raw data still has a zip file in it. Here's raw data LX, here's the zip file, but notice it isn't visible in Arc because it does not recognize zip files. It's time for a self-check. This is exactly what yours should look like, with the difference of your user ID in this area and your user ID here. Yours should be exactly as mine, coming from your directory into your labs, your LabX, your user ID, and raw data are on the same indentation. Data and maps are within the user ID. The map is within maps. There's a folder indented within raw data LX, and there are 4 pieces of data within 311 LabX data. You should only have one LabX folder. You should only have one data LX. You should only have one raw data LX, and you should only have one GIS 311 LabX data. There should not be another folder indented here about where cities is, and then cities, counties, states, and streets within a second folder. If yours looks identical to mine, it's time to take a screenshot. And to create a perfect screenshot, I would click out of the area that I'm about to screenshot. There's an image in the directions of what the screenshot should look like exactly, and I'm going to demonstrate it here. I would suggest using the snipping tool. So in the bottom left, now I'm looking for snipping. I found the snipping tool. I'm not going to use snip and sketch yet. I'm just going to click new, and then I'm going to try to draw a perfect box around my directory. Notice I'm not cutting into the lower folder. I'm not cutting off the MXD. I don't have a lot of extra space. I have everything extracted. There are no pluses within my labs at this point, and especially not LabX. And I let go. And the snipping tool has given me this perfect snip. And there are no remnants or things obscuring the image of the snip. Sometimes there'll be little dots from other folders on the left, right, bottom, etc. But this is a perfect snip. I'm going to copy it by, I think I could hover here and copy. Let's see, copy, and then close the window. And I do not need to save changes to the snip, so I'm going to be cautiously click no and navigate back to my write-up. The write-up is where I will put my answer for number 4. We've already got number 3, number sign, 4, space, and then paste, Control V. And notice these are not obnoxiously huge images. I'm only at 2 pages, and this is on, the number is on the bottom left of the image, and that's because we're trying to make everything professional and neat, and it's good to start now. Because we've not saved this document yet, it's a good time to save our write-up. So I'm going to click File, Save As. I'm going to browse, and this window is a little too big for the video view. The easiest way that I've found is go to Quick Access, that's not my winter directory, spring directory, labs, LabX, user ID LabX, and I'm going to paste it, or excuse me, save it into the user ID LabX. And in doing so, I'm going to enter the proper name. Proper title is user ID underscore capital LAB underscore X underscore WU for write-up or write-up. whichever you prefer. It will automatically come up with a docx. We are not done with the write-up, but we're saving it just in case something happens. And I'm going to move the write-up out of the way. It's finally time to start making our map. If you haven't already, save your map as user ID labx blank. You do so, I've already saved mine, but you could do so by File, Save As, and navigating back to the labx. I will always click this little down arrow to make sure that I'm in the proper folder, and then change it, save it as user ID labx blank. Mine's already done. I could save it again. It doesn't hurt anything. It says, do you want to replace? I can just say yes. It's still working. For now, I need to get my data from the raw data into the data. I cannot put my data into the map from the raw data. It's a little bit complicated, but if I did, the map would always look for the data coming from raw data in this data folder. It would know that there's this imaginary path from these two folders rather than the folder that you're submitting. So while it seems a little wonky, it is important to move everything from this folder down here up to the data. And you do so by just clicking and dragging. Not the whole folder, just each item of data. Now this folder is empty, but there is still the zip file in raw data. So if all of this data were to get corrupted, I could very easily go back in Windows, re-extract, and the data would be back in this folder, and I wouldn't need to worry about the corrupted data, which does definitely happen. We move the data instead of copying because there's no need to save it here and in the data folder because we have the zip file to extract. And that is why we click and drag to move. We now have an empty raw data LX aside from this folder, and we have the data up here in LX. And then now it's finally time to add some data to our map. In this step, we'll learn how to add data to the map, clear the map projections, which we'll cover in a couple weeks, but we will practice it as we start this lab, your first lab, and zoom to some of our layers. We may get a few errors along the way, and it's important just to follow along closely and follow the directions, or if you're watching this video, just listen to some of these explanations. To get started, right-click on the data frame in your table of contents. Here's the table of contents. Here's the data frame that we renamed LabX data frame. We're going to right-click the table of contents. Notice that these layers symbolize what we're actually going to be adding to the map, which are layers on top of each other. Maps can have multiple data frames, but in this map we'll only have one. Data frames can and should be named so that they're useful in helping you manage the MXD, which is a map. A .mxd is a map file. Another interesting fact about data frames is they can and should be written without underscores. Because they are not a file name, it is okay to write them using normal English and in perhaps title case rather than sentence case, which is why I have a capital D and a capital F on my data frame. If you haven't already renamed your data frame from layers to LabX data frame, change it now. And we're ready to begin adding data. Let's start with states. Click and drag states to the mapping area. In my case, states came up in this purplish color. Your screen should be similar. It may be a different boring pastel color. Make a mental note that you should never leave or submit maps that have pastel symbology. The color on this map right now is called Symbology, and after Lab X, you should never ever submit any lab that has the default color that ArcMap gave it as you dragged it into the map. Because we just dragged the layer into the map, we know that we need to change the symbology because we never leave it at the default. But the very first thing you should do before you change symbology or drag another layer into the map is to clear the projection of the data frame. And this is going to sound confusing. It's probably something you've never done before, but is an important step to make sure our layers actually line up. For now, I'm just going to explain and show you how to do it, and realize that every time you bring a layer, drag a piece of data into the map to create a layer, you must clear the projection of the data frame. You do so by right-clicking on the data frame, scrolling down to Properties, clicking on the Coordinate System tab, and there's a little globe here and the tiny down arrow that says Add Coordinate System. In this case, we are not going to add the coordinate system, we are going to clear it. So we clear the coordinate system and it says no coordinate system. I'm going to move this off to the side a little bit and click Apply. Nothing happened to the map. Sometimes the map will disappear or look like it disappears. We'll now click OK. That is how you clear the projection of the data frame, which you must do every time you add a layer to the map. And we do that routinely so that we always have our data lining up. And this will make a lot more sense when we do Lab 3. And next, let's add cities to the map. I click on cities, drag it to the map, and cities across the United States show up in a coincidentally a very dark purple. You should be asking yourself what the next thing you should do is. If you were thinking clear the projection of the data frame, you are correct. Right click on the data frame, Properties, Coordinate System, Add Coordinate System button, and Clear. Apply and OK. Click and add counties to your map. The very next step should be evident now. Properties, Coordinate System, Clear. Apply, OK. It's interesting that the very faint lines of the counties within Colorado may or may not have been evident to you depending on what color they were or what symbology they have when they were added to your map. To see them more closely, let's zoom to the counties. So let's right click on counties, scroll down, and zoom to layer. The map zooms to the layer of counties, and now it is much more easily viewed. We could go back to the previous extent. That's all of the states. That's the extent to which we are looking at the data before. Or we could go back to the next extent or go to the next extent to where we were zoomed in on counties. As a double check, let's right click on our data frame, look at Properties, and make sure that this says no coordinate system. Again, when we start Lab 3, this will make a lot more sense. But for now, we must always be clearing the coordinate system of our data frame. Drag streets to the map. Perform the step that you should always perform after adding data. And now let's zoom into the streets. And you should remember how to do this from zooming into the counties. So now we're zoomed into the streets within one county of Colorado. I can go back to the extent and even further, or I can get right back into the streets. If we want to look at the full extent of the map again, there's a couple ways to do it. One is to use the button that I was using before, and that's back to previous extent. There's also a button that's called full extent. So hover on these buttons, the icons, until you find full extent. Now I can see the full extent of my map, and I can hover there to show that that was the full extent button. Zoom to several layers again just to get the hang of it. I'm zooming to counties. I can zoom to cities. Cities is similar to the same extent as states because they extend to the same geographical area. So if I want to go to streets, I could zoom to layer. Let's go back to full extent. We're going to consider our map done for now. We're not going to change symbology because that's beyond the scope of this lab. This is more about utilizing data. If you'd like to play with the symbology or alter it, that's great. I do offer bonus points if you change the symbology so that it's not the default colors. That's not in the directions, but if you listen to this video and you do so, you get a point for each of the layers that you change the symbology on. Try to use something appropriate. Try to make it so you can see the different or the variations between cities, the states, the counties, and the streets. You won't be able to see the streets that well, but try to choose something appropriate, and it's a way to get a few bonus points. Again, we should change the colors, but I'm not going to take you through that. You're welcome to figure it out on your own and earn a few bonus points. We are now almost done with our map. Let's save the map again, this time saving it as what will be the final map. As mentioned earlier, File, Save As, Maps LX. It's important to use the down arrow to verify that it is in Maps, User ID, LabX, 311 Labs in my directory. And now I have user ID already, so I can place my cursor in front of that, add the AAA, GWL GIS, my user ID, LabX, and instead of blank, I'm going to change it to final. This technically isn't the final map, but I'm saving it as the final map to show you what you can do as you save your final map. I click Save. The map is now saved and now the active map. Notice it is bold here and the other map blank is now not bold. I now have two. You may have more maps within your maps folder. We're going to modify the screen a little bit more and save one more time. This extra white space up top and the extra white space on the bottom will come out in your map if we were to export a final map from here, which is our next step. So quite literally, if I were to export this map, and you're not doing it yet, but if I were to export this map, this is what would come out. And there's extra, your screen won't do that with the arrows, by the way. This extra space is in the mapping area, so it will be in your map. And there's a full explanation about this in the directions. So to clear up this space, right now at full extent, this is as wide as my window can be because of my catalog and other things or catalog and my table of contents. I guess I could scrunch my table of contents a little bit smaller, go to full extent, which you can do, but there's still, the map can only get so big. So I'm going to scrunch up the bottom of my window and then zoom to full extent again. The width of the map doesn't change because that area has not changed, but the map is now centered, and I can scrunch it up a little bit more and click zoom to full extent. The goal is to have equal space about this hand that you see, the panning hand, around all sides of the map, on all borders, north, south, east, and west. Now this map is ready for us, saving one last time and an export. So let's save our map again. We'll file, save as. I can keep it the same name because I don't want two AAA maps. You're always just one AAA user ID final map. If you have multiple AAA items, you need to delete them prior to submitting. I'll click save. Do you want to replace it? Yes. In the directions, it says to document your process with this map. So if yours looks nearly identical to mine, yours might be bigger, but you have equal spacing all around your map. You can complete an alt print screen, which will take a picture of just this mapping window, or you could use the snipping tool, which I'm going to use to keep it more neat. I use the snipping tool. I'll say new. I'll move the snipping tool dialog out of the way, and then take a snip of my entire map window. Notice that it's the entire map window, not just the map. So this is a pretty good snip. Notice that I have a little bit of extra down on the bottom. You may not be able to see my cursor highlighting the bottom left. So on retrospect, I think I'm going to use the alt print screen and see if that works. So I'm going to minimize, go back, highlight the arc. In that case, it made it too big. I double clicked and it made it the whole screen. I'm going to highlight the ArcMap window and then try Alt Print Screen to see if that works. I'll go to my write-up document. This is item number 5. I click to the left of the paragraph mark, pound 5, and paste. And what happened is it brought in my snip from snipping, and it's got these remnants on the bottom and a little bit in the left. So I'm going to fix those. First, I'm going to make the number appear on the bottom left by making this a little bit smaller. Notice now the number is on the bottom left. I will now click in the map, click on Format, click on Crop, and slightly crop my image on the bottom to make it a little bit more neat, and click Crop. I will also do so on the left. Click on Crop, scrunch it in a tiny bit, and click Crop. Now my image is a lot better. I'll click to the right of the map or the screenshot, to the left of the paragraph mark, click enter in preparation if there's another item that I have to add to my write-up. Navigating back to ArcMap, this is my mapping window. Don't get confused, my write-up is here. I'll move that out of the way. I'll also move some other items out of the way. Move Firefox out of the way. And notice my window isn't as big as the entire video screen now, because I wanted to scrunch up my map. Using the directions, I'm now going to export a map. So Now when I export, the map will be this size. Instead of a full screenshot of the map, I'm doing what we complete at the end of almost every lab as well, which is exporting the map. I'm going to File, Export Map, and an Export Map dialog pops up. It's a little bit large for the screen. Hopefully I can, yes, we can get it all in. So I'm going to export a map. Notice it is trying to go to my Maps L3. If I were to simply name this PNG AAA user ID LabX final, I would never be able to find it to submit or to add it to my write-up. So notice where you're saving. Earlier I've mentioned repeatedly to click this down arrow. This happens to be in my 312 winter directory. So to get to the proper directory, I'll click on Quick Access, navigate to my Spring 2020 311 directory. In my Labs, LabX, User ID, and Maps. This is a map that I'm exporting. I'm exporting a map, so it belongs in the Maps folder. The easy part is I've already named my final map AAA User ID LabX Final. Thus, the PNG, or it will be a PNG in a moment, the map that I'm exporting has the proper name immediately because it's the same name as the final map. If yours does not have PNG, click the down arrow and change it from whatever it was. It may have been JPEG, but in this case, please choose PNG, and let's keep it at 300 dpi. The image size we can keep because we know we've got a good image size here because we've scrunched up our borders. I'll click Save. Nothing appears to happen, but there is now an image within your Maps folder. I should now add my image, so I'm going to pull back my write-up. And to insert an image, first of all, I need a number 6. And then Insert, Pictures, navigate to my Quick Access, my Spring directory, my Labs, LabX, User ID, Maps, and there is my PNG. I click my PNG, I insert it into the map, and it fits along number 6. It's now time to save my write-up for the last time. File, Save As, in my LabX folder, User ID LabX. Here's my User ID LabX write-up. I'll click Save. My write-up is complete and I can close it. I still have my map open, however. Prior to saving ArcMap, it's important to perform a few last steps, similar to the preliminary steps. One is to zoom to the preferred extent. And in this case, we've already zoomed to the preferred extent. So we've already accomplished one of these steps. The next step is to close any and all tables. We have not opened any tables, so we don't need to close any tables at this point. We should make sure that nothing is selected, and you have not selected anything. Once you've verified that those 3 things are done, you zoomed into the preferred extent, you've closed any and all tables, and nothing is selected, it is time then to close ArcMap. Now that I've made sure that I've zoomed to an extent, closed any and all tables, and that nothing is selected, I can close ArcMap by clicking the Close button. If you end up with errors in future steps, it's because you forgot to close ArcMap. We're about to zip up your directory, and if ArcMap is open, you may get an error, and that's why we always close ArcMap before we compress our file for submission. In this case, it's asked, do you want to save your changes? I'll say yes to make sure I didn't forget to save anything. And now I have closed ArcMap. I'm now going to open Windows to prepare to zip up my final assignment. To submit my final assignment, my user ID folder zipped up, I need to compress it or zip it, and we'll go through that step right now. I'm back in Windows. I'll make this window a little bit bigger. Right now I'm looking at raw data. I should go to LabX. Whenever you prepare an assignment to submit, you should click on the actual lab, the house for everything for the lab. So not labs, but the actual lab itself. In this case, LabX. I could also do that on the left side pane by going to my D drive, my Spring directory, in my labs, and clicking on LabX. It's the same place. This LabX is that LabX. This is imperative. I need to see the raw data, and I need to see my user ID, LabX. To create my zip file, the process is very simple. You start with the proper folder, everything will be perfect. Start with your user ID, LabX, right click. Notice I wasn't quite on the folder, so it didn't give me the right menu. But if I start on the folder, right click, send to compressed zipped folder. Again, it's user ID that I'm zipping, not LabX, and I'm doing it from the details area of the screen. I'm not over here in the navigation pane. It will not work in the navigation pane. I right click, send to compressed, and it automatically creates the properly named labx.zip. This is the file that you will submit to the Canvas zip area. Remember, there are two for LabX. One is a write-up and one is a zip. This is the zip that you'll submit, and your write-up should be within your user ID folder. Now that you've prepared everything for submission, you may submit your LabX. Upload the LabX write-up to the LabX write-up Dropbox, and upload the user ID LabX zip to the zip Dropbox on Canvas. In the directions, there's a list of common errors that you should try to avoid. I won't detail them now, but they are listed in the directions at the very end of the lab. Congratulations if you followed along and you've completed the lab, or if you feel like you're well prepared to complete LabX in class. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please like, share, enter comments. I'd be glad to hear your comments on the video.